Aaliyah lived in a small village called Makwani. It was a place where the sun shined bright, the air smelled fresh, and children played in the fields. Houses were made of mud bricks, and people knew each other by name. Aaliyah was different from other girls in her village. While most girls helped their mothers cook or fetch water, Aaliyah loved to read books. She sat under the big baobab tree with her old notebook, writing down her dreams. She wanted to work in a big office in the city. She wanted to wear nice clothes, use a computer, and do something important. Her father was a farmer. He worked hard in the fields and believed girls should stay home and take care of the family. But Aaliyah's mother saw something special in her. She saved small coins so that one day Aaliyah could study, and Aaliyah did not disappoint. She studied harder than anyone and won a scholarship. The whole village was shocked when she got a job in a big city office. Some people were happy, but others whispered, "She is just a village girl. The city is too big for her." Even her father warned her, "Be careful, Aaliyah. City people don't think like us." But Aaliyah was excited. She packed her clothes, hugged her mother, and stepped onto the big city bus. As the bus moved, she looked out the window, watching her village disappear behind her. She had no idea what the city would be like. Would people be kind? Would they like her? Would she fit in? One thing she knew, she would not give up. Her journey had just begun. The city was big, fast and loud, nothing like Aaliyah's village. Tall buildings touched the sky and cars honked all the time. People walked quickly, dressed in shiny shoes and fancy clothes. No one smiled. No one stopped to talk. Aaliyah held her small suitcase tightly. She felt small in this big place. She found the address of her new home, a small room in a shared apartment. It was nothing like her village house, but she was happy. "This is my new life," she whispered to herself. The next morning, Aaliyah woke up early. She wore her best dress, neatly ironed, and tied her hair in a braid. She wanted to look smart. She walked into the big glass office, holding her job letter. At the front desk, a lady with bright red lipstick looked at her. She frowned. "Are you the new assistant?" she asked. Aaliyah nodded and smiled. The lady looked her up and down, from her simple dress to her braided hair. She sighed. "All right, follow me." Inside the office, everyone looked different. They wore expensive clothes, high heels, and makeup. The women's hair was straight and smooth. No one looked like Aaliyah. Some people stared. Others whispered and giggled. Aaliyah felt nervous, but she told herself, "I am here to work, not to fit in." Her boss, Mr. Junaid, shook her hand. "Let's see if you're as smart as your grades say," he said. Aaliyah sat at her desk, ready to prove herself, but she had no idea what was coming next. Aaliyah was excited to start her work. She wanted to show everyone that she was smart and hardworking. Her boss, Mr. Daniel, gave her a task. "Make a report about our new project," he said. Aaliyah worked all day without stopping. She read documents, checked numbers, and made sure everything was perfect. By evening, she gave the report to Mr. Daniel. He looked at it and nodded. Not bad," he said. But he didn't smile. Aaliyah was happy. She thought, "Maybe now they will see that I belong here." The next day, Aaliyah heard people laughing behind her. "She's smart, but does she even know how to dress?" someone whispered. "Her hair looks so old-fashioned," another voice said. Aaliyah pretended not to hear, but inside she felt hurt. During lunch, she sat alone. No one invited her to sit with them. She watched as her colleagues, especially the fancy-looking ones, laughed and talked. They made jokes about their vacations, parties, and shopping. Aaliyah had never been to a fancy restaurant. She had never bought expensive shoes. She felt different. At the next office meeting, Mr. Daniel praised a woman named Olivia. "This is an excellent report, Olivia," he said. "Good job." Aaliyah froze. It was her report. Olivia had taken her work and said it was hers. Aaliyah looked at Mr. Daniel. waiting for him to correct her, but he just smiled at Olivia. Aaliyah felt angry, but she said nothing. This was not going to be easy. Aaliyah sat at her desk trying to focus, but the humiliation from the meeting kept playing in her mind. She had spent hours preparing that report, yet Olivia had taken all the credit. And Mr. Daniel had acted like Aaliyah didn't even exist. She wanted to speak up, but she knew how things worked here. Complaining would only make her look unprofessional. Instead, she told herself to work harder and prove her worth in ways they couldn't ignore. Over the next few weeks, Aaliyah continued to put in extra hours, refining her work and ensuring every task she handled was perfect. She hoped that someone would finally recognize her dedication, but instead, she noticed something strange. Her workload kept increasing, yet none of her efforts were acknowledged. Olivia, who barely did any work, was constantly praised, invited to important meetings, and treated like a rising star. One afternoon, Aaliyah was sitting at her desk when she received an email from HR, asking her to report to the office immediately. Confused, she walked to the HR department, where Ms. Taylor, the head of HR, sat waiting with a blank expression. "Aaliyah, we appreciate the time you've spent with the company," Ms. Taylor said in a cold, rehearsed tone. "Unfortunately, we've decided to let you go. Your performance has not aligned with our company's standards." Aaliyah felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath her feet. "But I've done everything asked of me," she protested. "My reports, my work, it's always been good." Ms. Taylor gave a small, dismissive smile. "It's not just about work. We need employees who represent the company image." At that moment, Aaliyah realized the truth. She wasn't being fired because of her performance. She was being fired because they didn't think she fit in. Aaliyah walked out of the office building, her termination letter still clutched in her trembling hands. The streets outside were as busy as ever, filled with people rushing to work, laughing, and carrying on with their lives. But for her, everything had come to a sudden stop. She had spent months proving herself, working harder than anyone else, yet it had all meant nothing. She wasn't fired for her work, but because she didn't fit their image. Her dark skin, natural hair, and simple dressing didn't match their idea of success. The reality of it stung deeper than she had expected. She walked aimlessly through the city, her thoughts clouded with disappointment and anger. How could they take everything from her without a second thought? She had left her village, worked tirelessly, and sacrificed so much, only to be cast aside like she was nothing. By the time she reached her tiny, rented apartment, she felt completely drained. She collapsed onto her bed, staring at the ceiling. Should she pack her bags and go back home? She could already hear the whispers of the villagers. We told her the city wasn't for her. For the next few days, she barely left her room. The fire inside her had dimmed, replaced by hopelessness. She avoided calls from her mother, not wanting to hear the concern in her voice. But on the 5th day, an unexpected message popped up on her phone. "We heard what happened. Meet me at Cafe Luna at 4 p.m. I have something to tell you." The sender, an old friend from university. Aaliyah sat up, curiosity flickering inside her. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the beginning. Aaliyah arrived at Cafe Luna, a small, quiet spot tucked between towering office buildings. The city had always felt too fast for her, but today she wasn't overwhelmed. She was angry, and that anger burned quietly inside her. At a corner table, Liam, her old university friend, waved her over. He had always been the ambitious type, someone who saw opportunities where others saw dead ends. "I heard about what happened," Liam said, watching her carefully. "They fired you because you didn't fit their image, didn't they?" Aaliyah let out a bitter laugh. "They didn't even try to hide it." Liam leaned forward. "That company isn't as perfect as it looks. They have problems, big ones. And I know how you can use that to your advantage." Aaliyah frowned, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Liam placed a folder on the table. I've been working with a few independent consultants. Big corporations don't always do their own research. They hire outside experts. And guess what? Your old company is about to put out a major project bid, and they need external consultants to handle it. Aaliyah's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. If we create a team, Liam continued, we can bid for that project and win it. The same people who fired you will have no choice but to work with you. Aaliyah's heart pounded. The thought of walking back into that office, not as an employee, but as someone they needed, it was almost too good to be true. For the first time in days, a small, determined smile appeared on her face. This wasn't just about getting back at them. This was about proving that she never needed their approval to succeed, and this time they wouldn't see her coming. Aaliyah sat across from Liam, her mind racing as she flipped through the documents he had handed her. It was all there. Her former company was looking for consultants for a major expansion project, one that required expertise she already had. They're going to receive bids from multiple firms, Liam explained. If we do this right, they'll have no idea you're behind one of them. Aaliyah exhaled slowly. Just a week ago, she had walked out of that office, humiliated and discarded like she was nothing. But now, she had a chance to make them depend on her without even realizing it. But how do we compete with big firms? She asked. They have more resources, more experience. Liam grinned. What they don't have is someone who knows exactly how they operate, their weaknesses, their mistakes, their blind spots. You've worked there, you know what they overlook. That's our advantage. Aaliyah nodded, the fire inside her growing stronger. They had underestimated her once. That was their first mistake. This time, she would use their own system against them. They couldn't use Aaliyah's name. The company would reject any bid linked to her. So they partnered with a small but rising firm, Blackwood Consulting. Liam would act as the firm's public face, while Aaliyah worked behind the scenes, shaping the strategy. Step by step, she poured all her knowledge into the project, creating a proposal so airtight, so innovative, that rejecting it would be impossible. Her former bosses had no idea that the person they had tossed aside was now planning their biggest downfall, and soon they would be the ones begging for her help. Aaliyah worked late into the night, perfecting every detail of the proposal. She knew exactly how her former company operated, what they wanted, what they feared, and most importantly, what they lacked. They always chose the safest, most predictable plans, but this time she would offer them something so cutting-edge, so foolproof, that rejecting it would be a risk they couldn't afford. Liam sent in the proposal under Blackwood Consulting's name, and then all they had to do was wait. 2 weeks later, the email arrived. Dear Blackwood Consulting, congratulations. Your firm has been shortlisted for the final round of project bids. Please prepare for an in-person presentation next week. Aaliyah smirked. They had taken the bait. The room was silent. Mr. Daniel sat at the head of the table, his hands clasped tightly as he stared at Aaliyah. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Olivia, who had stolen her work, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Other executives whispered among themselves, trying to process what was happening. Aaliyah could see the question in their eyes. How was she here? How had she gotten this far? But she wasn't here to answer their questions. She was here to win. Liam stood to introduce their company, but Aaliyah didn't need anyone to speak. For her, when the time came, she took the floor. She walked to the front of the boardroom, clicked the first slide of her presentation, and spoke with confidence. This project will define your company's future, she said, looking directly at Mr. Daniel. But the current strategies you have in place are outdated, risky, and, quite frankly, ineffective. A ripple of surprise ran through the room. No consultant had ever spoken to them this directly before. Aaliyah pointed out flaws in their systems that only an insider could know. She highlighted weaknesses they had ignored, gaps in the market they had failed to notice. Then she presented her solution, an innovative, foolproof strategy that would not only fix their problems, but make them industry leaders. By the time she finished, the room was completely still. No one could deny it. She had outsmarted them all. Mr. Daniel cleared his throat. "This is impressive," he admitted, but Aaliyah could see the tension in his jaw. He knew he had no choice but to consider her proposal. And that was exactly what she wanted. Aaliyah took her seat, her expression calm, but inside, she could feel the shift in the room. The people who once ignored her, whispered about her, and dismissed her talent were now hanging onto her every word. Mr. Daniel flipped through the documents in front of him, trying to find a flaw, anything he could, used to reject her. But there was nothing. Her proposal was airtight. "This is a very strong strategy," he finally said, forcing the words out. His voice lacked enthusiasm, but the hesitation in his tone told Aaliyah everything she needed to know. They couldn't afford to let this deal go. One of the senior executives, Mr. Carter, spoke up. "We'll need to review the details, but I must say, Blackwood Consulting has presented the most forward-thinking plan we've seen." Aaliyah almost smirked. The same company that fired her now needed her. Mr. Daniel clenched his jaw. He didn't want to work with her, but he had no choice. If they rejected her now, it would be obvious that personal bias, not business sense, was driving their decisions. After a tense silence, he nodded. "We'll discuss the final details and get back to you." Aaliyah leaned forward slightly. "You do that," she said smoothly. She gathered her documents, stood up and walked out of the room, leaving them to deal with the weight of their own mistake. Liam whispered as they exited, "You just put them in checkmate." Aaliyah smiled. This wasn't just about winning a deal anymore. This was about taking control, and the game was far from over. Aaliyah and Liam walked out of the boardroom, but she knew the battle wasn't over yet. The executives were cornered. They needed her expertise, but their pride wouldn't let them admit it so easily. For the next few days, they delayed their response. Emails were sent back and forth. Small, unnecessary concerns were raised, and excuses were made. Mr. Daniel was stalling, but Aaliyah wasn't worried. She had another card to play. Using her contacts, she arranged a meeting with a competing firm, one that was their biggest rival. She presented the same strategy, but this time she made sure they knew that her former company was considering it too. The rival executives were quick to act. "If they don't take this deal, we will," one of them said. And just like that, Aaliyah created a bidding war. 2 days later, Aaliyah's phone rang. It was Mr. Daniel. His voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the tension behind it. "After careful consideration, we'd like to move forward with Blackwood Consulting," he said. Aaliyah didn't respond right away. She let the silence drag, making him uncomfortable. "We'll need to discuss the contract terms," she finally said, keeping her tone cool. Now, she was in control. For the first time, they weren't dictating her future. She was dictating theirs. Mr. Daniel hesitated, but then he sighed. "We'll send over the details." As Aaliyah ended the call, she leaned back and smiled. She had just secured the deal of a lifetime with the same company that had thrown her away, but she wasn't done yet. The best part of her revenge was still to come. Aaliyah had won the contract, but getting the deal wasn't enough. The people who had humiliated her, stolen her work, and thrown her away still held power. She wanted more than just a business victory. She wanted the truth to come out. Over the next week, she reached out to former employees who had also been mistreated. Some had been pushed out like her, others had been denied promotions despite their hard work. And then she found the perfect leverage. Through an anonymous source in HR, she got access to internal company emails, proof that employees were judged not just on skills, but on their corporate image, a hidden policy. that unfairly favored certain people while quietly pushing out others. She had the receipts. One morning, an expose appeared on a popular business news site. The article exposed how Aaliyah's former company systematically discriminated against employees who didn't fit their brand. Screenshots of internal memos leaked to social media. The evidence was undeniable. Within hours, a corporate bias started trending. Customers, investors, and even employees demanded answers. Some of the company's biggest clients started reconsidering their partnerships. The company's stock price dipped, and then came the final blow. A government investigation was launched. The center of it all was Aaliyah's story. She had been their nobody, a girl from a village who didn't belong. Now she was the name on every headline, and for the first time, her former bosses were the ones being judged. The office that once buzzed with confidence now felt like a battlefield. Executives scrambled to do damage control, desperately trying to calm investors and the media. Mr. Daniel sat in a crisis meeting, his face tense as he read the latest headlines. The company was losing major clients, employees were resigning, and their reputation was falling apart. Then came the most humiliating moment. Aaliyah's name was being mentioned everywhere, in newspapers, on social media, in business discussions. She had become a symbol of resilience, a woman who had exposed the cracks in the corporate system. The company had no choice. They needed to fix their image, and there was only one way to do that. They had to bring Aaliyah back. Aaliyah was at her office going over new contracts when her phone rang. It was Mr. Daniel. His voice lacked the arrogance it once held. Now it was careful, controlled, almost desperate. Aaliyah, we would like to formally invite you to return to the company. We believe that with your leadership, we can rebuild a stronger and more inclusive workplace. Aaliyah leaned back, in her chair, her lips curving into a smile. Let me get this straight, she said. You want me, the woman you fired for not fitting in, to come back and fix the company? Mr. Daniel cleared his throat. We believe you are the right person to lead this change. Aaliyah let the silence stretch. Then, in a calm, confident voice, she said, I'm not coming back as an employee. If I return as your boss. Mr. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He had no choice, and Aaliyah knew it. For the first time, Aaliyah had the power. The same company that had tossed her aside was now at her mercy. She had exposed their secrets, stolen their biggest clients, and turned their reputation into a national scandal. They needed her. And now, she was going to make sure they never forgot that. Mr. Daniel hesitated before answering. Aaliyah could hear the tension in his voice. We are open to negotiations, he said, carefully choosing his words. Aaliyah smirked. There's nothing to negotiate, Mr. Daniel. If I return on my terms. She laid out her conditions. She would come back as the Chief Strategy Officer, one step below the CEO. The HR team that fired her would be removed. New hiring policies would be put in place to ensure fair treatment. Her consulting firm, Blackwood Consulting, would remain independent, meaning she still had her own company. It was an impossible offer to refuse. They had no better options. Within 48 hours, the deal was signed. Aaliyah wasn't just back in the company, she was running it. The next week, Aaliyah walked back into the office, but this time it wasn't as an outsider. She was escorted to her new corner office, one bigger than Mr. Daniel's. She passed by Olivia, who looked down at her desk, avoiding eye contact. She passed by the executives who had once mocked her. And then she sat at the head of the boardroom table. Shall we begin? She said, her voice cool, confident, and in control. Her revenge was complete, and she had won, without ever lowering herself to their level. Aaliyah sat in her new office, looking out at the city skyline. The same city that had once felt too big, too fast, and too unwelcoming was now hers to conquer. She had won, not by fighting dirty, not by stooping to their level, but by proving that real power doesn't come from fitting in. It comes from standing out. Her former bosses, the ones who had doubted her, now reported to her. The company had changed, and not because they wanted to, but because she had forced them to. She had created opportunities for others like her, talented, hard-working professionals who had been overlooked. She had rewritten the rules of success, making sure that no one would ever be judged the way she had been. 1. Never let others define your worth. Aaliyah was told she didn't fit the image, but success isn't about looks. It's about talent, intelligence, and hard work. 2. Revenge isn't always destruction. It's winning with dignity. She could have exposed them out of anger, but she chose a smarter path. She made them need her. She made them respect her. 3. Use every setback as a setup for a comeback. Getting fired felt like the end, but it was really the beginning. Sometimes rejection is just redirection. 4. Build something of your own. Instead of waiting for opportunities, she created her own. Owning her own consulting firm gave her real power. 5. Success is the best revenge. In the end, the people who tried to break her had to work under her. She didn't just get her job back, she got their jobs too. As Aaliyah closed her office door, she knew her journey wasn't over. She had built something greater than revenge. She had built a legacy. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, comment what you learned from the tale, and subscribe for more enchanting African stories.